Tanse, TR Wheatley, Nitenisagasawan, Opasqueacuchi, and this is APTN National News Weekend. We start in Quebec. Organizations providing shelter services in Montreal say that homelessness among Indigenous people is increasing as temperatures drop below zero. As Savannah Craig reports, some people experiencing homelessness are finding creative ways to stay warm.
Can you see the tent in that photo?
A homeless person is using a white tarp to hide their tent to camouflage with the snow.
And this is where we're at. People are learning to hide better because we don't provide adequate resources for them.
As temperatures drop below zero, many experiencing homelessness have been forced to use new methods to stay warm.
It'd be minus 20 and they'll be staying there for the night.
Some have been using emergency rooms, while others have had to be more creative.
So if the question is, where do Indigenous women sleep in Montreal? Well, one's sleeping right there.
This is not a rare occurrence. It happens every year in Montreal that homeless people are forced to use different ways to shelter during the winter.
It's been a couple days since someone's been in here, but in the last month, someone has stayed under these stairs.
In 2022, APTN had a similar interview about this issue with David Chapman. Chapman is the executive director of day shelter Resilience Montreal.
The same theme just continues, all the way through this alley. And it's year after year, it's the same thing.
For some, refuging outside of shelters can be fatal. Chapman says 2 Indigenous women who were in and out of homelessness died last week. Deaths of Indigenous homeless people is not a new occurrence.
April Blue Boy finally went home to her home community, but it didn't work out, so she came down here and died of an overdose.
Last summer, Resilience Montreal organized a memorial for those that had passed. This winter, Resilience Montreal wanted to have another memorial. However, new people die each week before one can be organized. Alexandre Amboise, the general director of Refuge Michuap Montreal, says homelessness in Montreal is growing, and in particular amongst Indigenous people.
Ce qu'on constate aussi dans nos statistiques, c'est que j'ai de plus en plus d'Autochtones finalement qui viennent, mettons, à Michuap ou dans d'autres services ailleurs aussi.
Ambroise believes there needs to be more emergency resources for the homeless.
Quand on est à pleine capacité, on essaie de trouver, mettons, une autre place pour, mettons, on a 5, mettons, qui viennent, mais on est déjà plein. Et c'est de faire quand on fait des appels, on se rend compte que c'est plein partout. Fait que ça serait peut-être important d'essayer d'ouvrir peut-être d'autres choses ailleurs.
While it's clear the demand for shelters is important, some say there needs to be more investment in transitional services.
What the government is investing right now is just addressing the basic needs of people that are unhoused. What we want to see as an organization is people accessing an affordable apartment.
Projet Autochtone du Québec offers resources to homeless people who are Indigenous in Montreal. Alongside emergency resources, PAC also offers transitional housing. This is the bridge between shelters and affordable housing.
So this will be their space as well. They also have their shared rooms. So there's a living room, a dining room, a conference room.
Quebec and Ottawa announced $115 million in June of last year to develop 51 emergency and transitional housing projects in Montreal over 2 years.
Even with the 150 millions, it's not addressing the needs of all people on the street right now.
PAC Executive Director Stacey Boucher Anthony says last year the Quebec government cut $1.2 million in funding for PAC.
We're barely meeting the basic needs.
So how much would be needed to adequately offer enough shelter, transitional housing, and social housing in Montreal?
We need to double the sum that is invested every year.
Even with this funding, Boucher Anthony says it would take generations to eradicate homelessness in Montreal. But in the meantime, Chapman has some ideas.
I don't know about you, but it seems to me that maybe a year-round accessible shelters in every neighborhood might be an idea. I don't know, common sense?
Savannah Craig, APTN National News, Montreal.
And in Manitoba, the province has announced its new plan to end chronic homelessness. The main focus is getting people living in encampments into housing. Sierra Bettens has more.
After months of planning, Premier Wap Kinew unveiled Manitoba's plan to end chronic homelessness on Tuesday.
It's called Your Way Home. And speaking to people who've been living in tents, people who've been out on the streets struggling with addictions or mental health issues or that intergenerational trauma, we are committed to working with you to help you find your way home.
The strategy includes a 30-day encampment outreach plan. After identifying the site, outreach workers will help individuals move from encampments to housing. Once everyone has moved, the City of Winnipeg will clean and decommission the site.
Compassionate approach to help people who are right now homeless, moving them out of encampments into safe housing with the supports that they need.
Tessa Blicky-Whitecloud, the former CEO of Silo Mission, has been hired as the Premier's senior advisor on ending chronic homelessness. She says transitioning people from encampments has been challenging, but believes that's due to a housing gap.
Because we're asking folks to move from encampments without having any housing options for them to move into, and without those housing options being planned with their specific needs in mind. And so we have been crying as a sector to say the solution to homelessness is housing units.
Kinew also acknowledged the complexities of homelessness and its disproportionate impact on Indigenous peoples. The 2022 Winnipeg Street Census found that over 75% of unhoused people in Winnipeg are Indigenous.
Some of the people that we see at a 190 site are products of the child welfare system because of their parents' experience in the 60s scoop and their grandparents' experience in the residential schools.
In the long run, the province plans to increase social housing supply, establish a housing-first approach, recruit and train more frontline staff, and invest in wraparound supports for mental health and addictions. Housing, Addictions and Homelessness Minister Bernadette Smith says that includes adding 300 social housing units.
These will be coming with supports in the next coming months. We will be working with organizations to support folks based on their needs. Some of those will be in Manitoba Housing, some of those will be in the community.
The province says they've housed more than 1,200 Manitobans in the past year. The Manitoba NDP government has vowed to end chronic homelessness in 2 terms, or by 2031. Sierra Buttons, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Meanwhile, the funeral for Manitoba First Nations Police Chief Doug Paulson happened on Friday in Winnipeg.
On behalf of the family of Chief Doug Paulson, Interim Chief Jason Colin, and all of the members of the Manitoba First Nation Police Service, we'd like to thank you for attending to honor Chief Paulson.
On January 8th, fire crews responded to a fire in Portage-la Prairie at Paulson's home. When they arrived, the house was completely burned, where his remains were also found. Paulson is remembered as a tireless advocate for Indigenous-led, culturally sensitive policing. Inspector Jason Collin, a member of Norway House Cree Nation, has been named as MFNPS Interim Police Chief. The Liberals and the NDP are both blaming each other for killing Bill C-61, the First Nations Clean Water Act. This is legislation that is supposed to affirm the inherent rights of all First Nations to clean and safe drinking water. With more, here's Fraser Needham.
With the Liberal government's decision to prorogue the House of Commons last week, a number of bills died before becoming laws, including the First Nations Clean Water Act. But in an interview last week on APTN's Nation to Nation, Indigenous Services Minister Patty Hajdu says it never had to come to this in the first place.
You know, the NDP talked a good game about, wanting to get this bill through and yet put up a number of roadblocks even after the AFN and other partners appealed with them to speed up the process.
But the NDP's Laurie Idloat says the Liberals are simply not being honest about the legislation. She says First Nations were not properly consulted on Bill C-61 before it was drafted, and it was the party's responsibility to make sure these voices were heard.
It was the NDP that was ensuring that First Nations voices were being heard by giving them as much time as we could to share their testimony, and as well as tabling amendments that they had submitted. I submitted about 80 amendments from First Nations, and that to me is not slow walking.
Idloat adds the NDP was willing to be flexible on the legislation and withdrew certain amendments in committee after the Assembly of First Nations asked it to do so. Haidu says there is still a remote chance the legislation could be saved, but the NDP should reconsider its pledge to vote non-confidence in the government when Parliament resumes sitting at the end of March.
But my hope is that when the Liberal leader is appointed and we come back to the House of Commons, that the NDP will realize that bringing down the House of Commons is going to deeply hurt First Nations. And maybe there'll be a path forward to bring that bill back to the House of Commons. I know our government would certainly support that.
But Idlout says Liberals have passed the point of no return, and there's virtually no chance of this happening.
I think they just became so desperate to cover up their failures, and they don't deserve another chance.
In order for Bill C-61 to be resurrected, opposition parties would have to agree to a motion to resume debate on the legislation where it had been left off prior to prorogation. Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
Tapwagiche. Time to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll tell you about an Indigenous Festival that's currently underway in Winnipeg. Welcome back. The Keanan Indigenous Theatre Festival is happening in Winnipeg this weekend. Keanan is a Southern Michif word meaning us. Our intern reporter Tyler Shingus takes us to the Prairie Theatre Exchange.
I just want to say welcome.
Charlene Van Buchenhout's vision to create a safer space for Indigenous artists has come to fruition.
It's the inaugural festival for Keanan, and it's an Indigenous theatre festival to celebrate, acknowledge, honor, and showcase our Indigenous talent here in this area of Manitoba from the past, present, and for the future.
Artists and creatives alike will share their work and make new connections through readings, workshops, and play presentations. Creatives are those who create new works, particularly in the arts, through the imaginative process. Métis artist Katie German is a director for one of the plays at the festival.
It's, I think, extremely important. I mean, we've got the biggest Indigenous population in Canada per capita, and so I think having an Indigenous theatre festival in Winnipeg is so necessary.
In Canada. Yeah.
In a world where it is hard to find authentic representation, this festival gives artists the chance to showcase and celebrate their work, as well as make new connections.
There wasn't a space to do Indigenous work when I was a kid, and looking on the stages and trying to see myself reflected, I didn't have that. And so having this space to be able to have people come and see and build the community of actors that are up and coming, and also honor the actors that did pave the way to be able to do all this work, that's what it is.
Ian Ross created Farewell nearly 30 years ago, a comedic drama about a First Nations effort to self-govern after their chief leaves to gamble in Las Vegas. Ross, who is Métis and Ojibwe, is back to share that piece of Indigenous theatre history with the newer generation. He says festivals such as Keanan are important for emerging artists in theatre to get their feet wet.
There always is, right? And you got to start somewhere, and I'm really glad that they've started this, and the work Charlene's done. And as far as where it can go, the sky's the limit.
As a Métis from the Red River Nation, Charlene opted to honor her heritage and drew inspiration from the Michif language to name the festival. The Keanan Festival will be happening throughout this weekend at the Prairie Theatre Exchange. I'm Tyler Shingus with APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Thanks, Tyler. Also in Winnipeg, a new mural has been unveiled at Nadinaway Youth Resource Center, also marking the launch of a young Dene man's art career. APTN intern reporter Veronica Blackcock with that story.
The mural was planned as a response to Truth and Reconciliation Call to Action number 66.
Today's an exciting day. We're unveiling a beautiful mural created by an Indigenous young artist, Jedrick, and it really is based on the 66th call to action regarding the need for federal funding, multi-year federal funding to support youth programs.
The partnership, led by graffiti gallery Steve Wilson, worked with Nadinaway's executive director Shanley Scott to bring artist Jedrick Thorasi's vision to life.
And he does do very beautiful paintings, but he also does really in-depth social commentary. on some of the big issues that we're experiencing across Canada right now. So residential schools, unmarked graves, a lot of the big topic issues.
With Steve and Shanley's seal of approval, the artist was given full creative control. We spoke to Jedrick about his work and what this collaboration means to him.
I just hope I could show people that you could have a really rough life and there's people there that will help you pick yourself up and sort of change your life for the better.
What advice would you give to other young Indigenous artists looking to make an impact?
It's important to just believe in yourself, in your dream. I learned that there's no set path for every artist. Every artist has their own path, and I had to find mine. So
Jedrick highlights the importance of community support, offering thanks to Graffiti Gallery, Nadinaway, and his daughter, Leah. The mural aims to continue a dialogue around the importance of supporting young people with special programs as they walk their path to reconciliation. Nadinaway's efforts include Tina's Safe Haven and Safe House, both 24/7 staffed locations for at-risk youth, while Graffiti Gallery offers programming like the Artists Action Project, building partnerships with local artists like Jedrick to address the 94 calls to action through strategized mural placements.
That's the big part of it, and when someone like Jedrick can combine his artistic skill and ability and social commentary with an organization like Nadinaway, well, beautiful things can really happen as you see outside.
But the conversation shouldn't end here.
I do believe young artists need support. I actually have a lot of trouble getting support. I did find support, but I had trouble finding it.
The murals can be seen at Nadinaway offices at 650 Burroughs in North End, Winnipeg. You can find more of Jedrick's art on Instagram at Jedrick5000. For APTN National News, I'm Veronica Blackhawk.
Thanks, Veronica. Bentwood boxes are iconic cultural symbols of the Haida, Tsimshian, and Tlingit people in northwestern Canada. As Sarah Connors tells us, a Bentwood box maker in northern British Columbia is passing on the traditional art form to the next generation.
Atlin-based artist Joanne Williams is a knowledge holder for a Tlingit art form that goes back thousands of years. While her methods look a bit different than those used by her ancestors, the heart of her craft is deeply rooted in tradition. That tradition is the dozens of Bentwood boxes scattered across her living room.
I haven't had a living room for quite a while now, and I don't mind it because I know that it's our gold and we both are really eager to teach and to pass on the knowledge.
Bentwood boxes were traditionally used for cooking, storage, gifts, and burial. Typically made out of cedar, they often display family crest or cultural imagery. Williams learned the art form from her grandmother, respected Atlin elder Elizabeth Nyman, as a child.
I think of my grandmother all the time, and I actually am very proud of what I'm doing for her because she actually really wanted us to teach, and she wanted to bring the boxes back to Atlin.
But don't be fooled by these boxes' simple design. Williams says a lot of skill and craftsmanship goes into making them. With a little help from husband Maurice, planks of wood are steamed until pliable.
This wood is yellow cedar. This is the lip here. I'm going to be bending it towards the lip.
The wood is then bent into shape and the two ends are temporarily screwed together while the wood dries. The pair teach the craft at schools and to anyone interested in learning.
I make the boxes very easy, and they're very thin for the teaching boxes. So yes, you'll find that they're very easy. But when you're doing the thicker box, you'll realize how hard it is. I need you to help me hold this one.
Williams estimates she and Maurice have made at least 5,000 boxes over the years. She says it's all about passing down tradition to the next generation.
If I teach one person and they teach 5 people, that's a lot of people. I got more than 2,000 people that I've taught already, so I'm pretty proud of that.
Williams hopes that by teaching Bentwood box making, she can pass the feeling of achievement on to others.
And accomplishments are great to have, so I'd really like more people to experience that accomplishment. And making the Bentwood box is a big accomplishment.
Sarah Connors, APTN National News, Atlin.
Tapwagi, Sarah. One more quick break. Stay with us to hear what's coming up for APTN's Hockey Night in Canada. A new Indigenous language will be making its debut. Welcome back. Starting this weekend, APTN will be broadcasting another 6 games for Hockey Night in Canada. This is the 6th season for Cree play-by-play. Some exciting news this year, play-by-play and in Nuktutut. Tanase, TR Wheatley and Tenesagasuin, Opasqueacochi.
And in Anaska, next got Dan Boy Iron, Clarence Iron.
Clarence Iron's been one of the main Cree commentators for the last 5 seasons. He's back again, starting this weekend for 3 more games.
I've been getting calls, when are you going to do the hockey games? Riley, put your feet
Starting new this year,
Kujud kusugaw yung kangat sinang niutaw yung nunavumi pakwa pilara yung maktak hockey la rin Nuktutut.
Hockey Night in Canada and Nuktutut. Mike Amalista's content and strategy for our network.
I think it's a big step forward for language revitalization and reclamation.
The past Cree games on APTN have inspired Pujuit Kusagak. He's already practicing for his debut. He's most excited for the Montreal versus Toronto game, as those are his favorite teams.
Vanik sa Zuki pihimalak pa akhanwak tunidluniw ko Caulfield mu Caulfield itakpitchen lakpityubok. David Ningyong and Robert Kabito Kanar. We've been talking here and there about it and just the excitement we have, but also the honor we have of being chosen to do this in our language. It's a dream come true for all of us.
The first 3 games will air in Cree. January 18 this weekend, Winnipeg facing Calgary. February 8 is Toronto and Vancouver. February 22 will be the Jets versus the Blues. In Nuktutut games, March 8 is Edmonton and Dallas. March 22nd is the Senators versus the Devils. And April 12 is Montreal and Toronto. Amalis says APTN is always looking for the next big idea for language preservation and ways to gain new viewers, not just on TV, but online.
So they're watching streaming devices, they're watching content via YouTube, watching linear television as well. But sporting events, live events always seem to get people coming back to television. So we're on the lookout for anything that makes sense economically to do and that can capture audiences and inspire them and engage them.
And engaging with the viewers is one of the best perks of the job, says Iron, who also offers this advice to those wanting to learn their mother tongue.
You got to start at home. That's where everything starts, is at home. You got to start speaking to your kids if you have, and don't be shy, you know. It's because of that residential school syndrome. A lot of people lost their languages like that. But you know, it's still not over. We can still revitalize it.
And that's all the time we have. Stick around for Hockey Night in Canada Cree. It's coming up shortly. From all of us at APTN, Egose, have a great weekend.